A country smaller than West Virginia built one of Europe's most survivable air forces, without carriers or allies. For decades this nation kept no visible airbases, and yet its jets could launch in under 10 minutes. Picture a wall of alpine granite in the pale light of morning. No hangar, no tower, no runway. Only a cliff face streaked with lichen and old snow. Then, without warning, the mountain itself begins moving. A seam appears where none existed. A cathedral-sized slab of solid rock slides sideways on hidden rails. Warm air spills into the cold. From the darkness inside the stone, a fighter jet rolls into daylight. Engines humming, no jet blast on the grass, no crew visible. The mountain has delivered its weapon. How does a peaceful nation hide fighter jets inside a mountain? To answer, we must understand the country. Switzerland covers roughly 41,000 square kilometers, smaller than West Virginia, smaller than the Netherlands, smaller than provinces. It is landlocked, with no coastline to defend, no strategic waters to command, no colonial territory abroad. What Switzerland has instead is altitude. Nearly 60% of its surface is mountain, arcing across the south. The Alps rise in walls of ice and stone past 4,000 meters, dividing Europe's most powerful militaries. France to the west, Germany and Austria north and east, Italy south. Switzerland encircled by giants historically. For most of its modern life, Switzerland has watched these neighbors go to war twice in 1 century. Industrial conflict swept the continent, and Swiss neutrality was declared, respected, and then quietly tested by everyone. Neutrality, in the Swiss understanding, is not a request. It is a promise the country must enforce alone. But here's the problem. Switzerland has no strategic depth, no vast steppe to retreat across, no ocean. From the French border to the Austrian border is only a few hundred kilometers of narrow alpine land. From the northern plateau, where most Swiss people live, to the Italian frontier is minutes by jet. If an air force is destroyed on the ground, no second air force waits behind an interior range. Because in Switzerland itself, the mountain range is the interior. There is nowhere further back to hide safely. So the Swiss reached a conclusion many larger nations quietly refused to accept about survival and modern air power. Their air force did not need to be the largest in Europe, nor the fastest fleet flying overhead. It needed only to survive the first strike, still flying on the morning after the bombs fell. But neutrality alone cannot stop bombers. So what could actually protect a small nation surrounded by total war? The year is 1940. The Luftwaffe holds airfields in France, southern Germany, and northern Italy simultaneously. Every Swiss border is now the front line of another country's war, watched and photographed almost daily.
Reconnaissance aircraft cross Swiss valleys, mapping every hangar, every runway, every fuel depot on the northern plateau. On paper, the Swiss Air Force fields a few hundred machines, Morane fighters, Messerschmitts, aging biplanes overall. In practice, every aircraft sits on grass strips and concrete pans, perfectly visible from 10,000 meters above. Swiss planners run the numbers. A single wave of medium bombers, escorted by fighters, could reach every airfield. Within 20 minutes of takeoff, one coordinated raid of perhaps 30 aircraft, perhaps 50, could strike the country. They could crater the runways, burn the hangars, and destroy the entire fleet on the ground before takeoff. Before a single Swiss pilot even climbed into a cockpit, the entire nation's air force would already be gone. There would be no dogfight. There would be no defense. Only a silent country and the smoking line. The military response to this arithmetic was almost heretical. Engineers began speaking of moving the air force underground. Not merely the offices, not the fuel depots alone. The aircraft themselves. The hangars, workshops, and pilots' quarters. Every element the enemy needed to destroy would now be placed behind many kilometers of solid alpine rock. What sat outside would only be the runway itself, and even that surface would be treated as expendable. The idea seemed impossible. How exactly do you fit runways, fuel, and fighter jets inside solid alpine rock? The answer began, as many Swiss answers do, with an old doctrine, one called the National Redoubt. Its origins reached into the 1880s, when Swiss engineers first fortified the St. Gotthard Massif and passes.
By the outbreak of the Second World War under General Henri Guisan, the redoubt became a national plan. If the lowlands were invaded, the Swiss army would not fight for the cities or the border towns. It would fall back into the mountains and hold the passes, the tunnels, the reservoirs, and alpine forts. Swiss forces would hold those positions until any attacker eventually exhausted itself against the granite of the Alps. The redoubt gave Swiss engineers something rare: permission to think in decades and permission to think in stone. Granite, in the right formations of the Alps, is one of the most effective natural armors on Earth. A kilometer of solid rock absorbs more blast energy than any concrete wall a nation could realistically pour. And Switzerland already knew how to tunnel through it, having spent half a century boring railway tunnels through granite.
Through Gotthard, Simplon, Lötschberg, routes so straight that entire trains vanished for 15 minutes inside the mountain. The tools were there, the workforce was there, the tradition was there. What changed was the purpose. Civilian tunneling crews, sworn to secrecy, began carving out chambers that did not appear on any public map. Rail spurs led into cliff faces and simply stopped. Ventilation shafts opened onto remote alpine meadows silently, and valley after valley, a second Switzerland began to grow inside the first, a nation carved from caverns. The doctrine was clear, yet the physics still seemed impossible. The Swiss were not planning ordinary underground hangars. Around the world, militaries built revetments, earth-covered bunkers, half-buried shelters. The Swiss went further than any of them. They planned full cavern airbases, complete installations excavated inside mountains, with everything a squadron needed carved from rock.
The runway, of course, had to remain outside. Physics allows no compromise on that. But everything else could hide. Taxiways left the open pavement, curved toward a wall of granite, and vanished through a portal cut into stone. Behind that portal sat blast doors, enormous slabs of steel and reinforced concrete, some weighing several hundred tons. Mounted on rollers strong enough to move that mass in under a minute, they sealed the mountain shut. When the doors closed, the mountain became continuous again. No thermal signature, no radar return, no visible target. Behind the blast doors, the cavern opened into a hangar large enough for a full squadron of jets. Wingtip to wingtip with room to service them all. A subterranean airfield hidden beneath living granite. Overpressure locks separated the outer chamber from the inner one, doubling the defense against a shockwave breach. If the first door failed under blast pressure, the second would still hold, sealing the mountain interior. Airlocks for personnel included decontamination showers, designed for battlefields contaminated by chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. The specification was blunt and terrifying. These bases were built to survive a tactical nuclear strike outside. Not merely conventional bombing, a nuclear detonation at the entrance itself. And yet, that was only half. Surviving the strike is one thing. Getting a combat jet back into the air is another problem entirely. So how does a modern combat jet actually take off from inside a solid mountain of granite? The answer is a choreography refined across 4 generations of Swiss combat aircraft, beginning deep inside the rock. The pilot walks through a personnel tunnel into the cavern, sometimes a full kilometer removed from daylight. The jet is already fueled, armed, and checked. Ground crew step forward to pull the wheel chocks. That crew lives inside the mountain, in dormitories carved from the same granite. The engine now spools up. And here, the engineering becomes almost surgical. A jet engine at takeoff thrust produces a wall of gas. That torrent of exhaust would tear an ordinary building apart. So the Swiss engineered dedicated jet blast tunnels. These are angled shafts lined with heat-resistant material, channeling the exhaust safely away from the aircraft entirely. The blast vents through a separate opening in the mountainside, sometimes hundreds of meters from the main portal. The pilot can now run engines to full military power inside the cavern without cooking walls or deafening crew. Without revealing position to anyone watching the front door, only a faint shimmer of heat leaves the stone. Then the doors open. The jet rolls out, taxis across pavement, turns onto the runway, and climbs skyward. The whole sequence, from cavern to airborne, can be measured in single-digit minutes. Response time was everything. 4 bases became the backbone of this system: Meiringen in the Bernese Oberland, Buochs on Lake Lucerne, Alpnach at the foot of Pilatus, Turtman in the upper Rhone valley. Others existed, but these 4 dominated. Each was built to shelter successive generations of Swiss fighters, from Hawker Hunters to Dassault Mirages of the 70s. The Northrop F-5 Tiger came next, and finally the F/A-18 Hornet, still flying from these caverns today. Inside each mountain, the Swiss replicated an entire airbase, fuel bladders, ammunition magazines isolated behind additional blast walls. A hit on the weapons store could not consume aircraft. Machine shops with lathes and welding rigs stood ready. They repaired battle damage without contacting the outside world.
Kitchens, sleeping quarters, command centers with independent radio and telephone. Some links routed through cables buried beside the same railway tunnels the country was famously known for engineering. Above ground, camouflage did the rest. Approach roads were painted, planted, and shaped to look like ordinary farm tracks. False facades of barns, sheds, and small hillside chapels quietly hid the entrances to underground service tunnels below. Nets and paints matched the seasonal color of alpine grass. Villagers learned, quietly, not to speak of them, and beneath all of this ran the environmental system, the true hidden nervous system of the mountain itself. Filtered ventilation drew in outside air, scrubbed it of chemical and radiological contaminants, then pushed it through the caverns. Water came from springs deep inside the rock, sometimes bottled at the source and stored for years underground.
Power flowed from the national grid when possible, and from diesel generators deep in the mountain when not. The Swiss called this NBC protection: nuclear, biological, chemical. A garrison could seal the doors and fight on. Sealed inside, disconnected entirely from the outside world, the garrison could continue to fight on for weeks unbroken. One base pushed this logic further than any other. Meiringen sits inside a broad valley of Canton Bern. The valley is ringed by peaks rising above 3,000 meters. Silent, unremarkable to the casual traveler. To visitors, it's a quiet town near Reichenbach Falls, known for a Sherlock Holmes legend, not military secrets. But at the northern edge of the valley, the cliff face is not at all what it appears. Set into that cliff is one of the last fully operational cavern airbases still remaining in Europe. Today, F/A-18 Hornets of the Swiss Air Force roll out from that mountain almost every single day. Pilots run quick reaction alerts, the same choreography Redoubt planners imagined, now flown by aircraft they never saw. Above the base, at more than 2,200 meters, lies Axalp, a live-fire gunnery range, a natural amphitheater of rock where Swiss pilots fire live cannon into targets on the alpine mountainside itself. It stands remarkably as one of the highest live-fire cannon ranges on the entire European continent today. The tactical value is remarkable. Everything a squadron needs is already inside the mountain, making sortie generation genuinely faster. Jets turn around and return to the air faster at Meiringen than at conventional airbases of comparable size. There is no walk from a distant hangar, no exposure to weather. Fuel and munitions arrive under granite. When the doors close, satellites see only rock and snow. When they open, a fighter is already moving. So what did this hidden air force actually buy Switzerland?
It bought a very specific kind of safety. This was not deterrence by threat.
Switzerland never claimed the ability to strike Berlin, Paris or Milan. It never built long-range bombers or ballistic missiles. Its air force was, and always remains, strictly defensive. The Redoubt bought deterrence by denial, the ability to make an attacker's plan fail before it began. Consider the calculation from the other side. A general planning to invade Switzerland must first neutralize its air force. But he cannot see it. His reconnaissance aircraft find empty runways and painted meadows. Intelligence knows fighters exist, but not where they will be when shooting starts. His first strike cannot destroy what he cannot even locate. Whether by aircraft, missile, or in a later era a tactical nuclear weapon, the target simply isn't there. Any Swiss aircraft surviving the first minute of the war will be back in the air within 10. That single fact changes everything.
It means the invader must plan for a prolonged air campaign. In some of Europe's most difficult terrain, against a force it cannot pin down, from unreachable valley bases. The cost of invasion, measured in aircraft lost, in weeks consumed, in political attention drawn, becomes wholly irrational. Neutrality, in this way, is not preserved by international law alone. It is preserved by cold arithmetic, by the arithmetic inside a foreign staff officer's notebook. The mountains, in Swiss doctrine, are not scenery. They are strategic infrastructure, treated with the same seriousness other nations reserve for their fleets or space programs. The Alps do not merely shelter Switzerland. They constitute a significant, deliberate part of the nation's defense. And yet, the Alps are quietly being repurposed once again, decades after the Cold War fell silent. Several cavern bases fell silent. The threat that justified them, massed armies pressing across the continent, receded. Tactical nuclear weapons stood down. Bunkers were decommissioned. Doors were sealed. Some sites were converted into cautious museums. Others were rented to civilian data centers. A chamber built to survive nuclear strike keeps servers beautifully. But history rarely stays quiet. As Europe's tensions returned in the 2020s, Swiss planners quietly reactivated what was mothballed. Sealed caverns were reassessed, ventilation systems tested, blast doors oiled and cycled. The doctrine had never truly been abandoned. It had only been dormant, waiting inside the granite for the centuries' shifting winds to demand it back. The threats, of course, have shifted. Modern Swiss defense thinking now includes drone warfare, cyber intrusion, and digital hardening. Some of the new work in the mountains is not for aircraft at all, but for data itself. Encrypted vaults hidden inside the granite, hardened command posts for a war now fought partly in software code. Others are being adapted for unmanned systems, for sensors, for stockpiles of components no modern military lacks. What remains constant is the mountain. In every generation of Swiss defense, the Alps play the same role. They have absorbed threats, they have hidden capabilities, they have converted geography into time, and time into deterrence. As long as Switzerland stays neutral at Europe's crowded center, its mountains will continue their quiet, disciplined work. The mountains still guard secrets the world has not seen. Consider once more what this small country actually did. Faced with neighbors it could not outmatch, in a century it could not escape, this Alpine Republic chose differently. A small Alpine Republic decided its air force would not sit on open runways waiting to die. It would live inside the earth. It would sleep behind cathedral doors of forged steel and solid rock. It would emerge on 10 minutes' notice, fly its mission, and then vanish again into the deep granite. And it would do all of this so quietly that most of the world barely ever noticed at all. For most of the Cold War, outsiders did not fully realize what had been built inside these mountains. That is the Swiss answer to the problem of being small. Not to shrink quietly from the world, not to depend on the mercy of larger powers, but to disappear into the landscape that defines the nation, and to make the mountains themselves part of the fleet. Quiet, patient, and always ready to answer.
If this story of hidden engineering surprised you, this channel has more films exploring how humanity bends impossible geography. From tunnels beneath oceans to entire cities carved into solid rock, each film reveals infrastructure hiding in plain sight. The next film continues that journey into buried architecture, holding up a modern world that barely notices its existence. Subscribe to continue the exploration. The next mountain